Hello, friends. We are excited to have today's conversation with you about treatment planning. Treatment planning is the fourth domain set aside by the NBCC, and it is 9% total of the questions on the exam, and it's 14 questions. So it's 9% of the overall exam, 14 questions. And so we're going to start our conversation off. Dr. James is actually going to kick us off, actually. So we're going to give it over to Dr. James.
All right. Okay, so treatment planning is a major part of the clinical process. Before we can get to the treatment planning part of the clinical process, we have to do some preliminary steps, some preliminary work. And so just like we did when we looked at our other section that included assessment, we must first make sure that we are assessing accurately, because whatever we do at the assessment level, it's going to impact our treatment plans. And so here is where the notion of case conceptualization comes into play. So we must actually accurately conceptualize our case. And here is where we're going to be gaining that initial information that we get from our clients. So we can think about that from the notion of biopsychosocial. So we're going to do our assessment in order to get a clinical picture, as much of a full clinical picture or clinical puzzle, whichever way you want to look at it, a complete picture as much as is possible. Because we understand when we're dealing with clients, whether it's self-report or whether it even is us assessing, we can only gain as much information as we're able to gain. And so our goal is to continually build a clinical picture and or complete a puzzle, a clinical puzzle. And so what we want to do is make sure that we are conceptualizing the case, and at a part of that case conceptualization is going to be diagnoses, if a diagnosis is warranted, okay, because not all the time are diagnoses warranted. If it's warranted, then of course you're going to use the DSM-5 to look at criteria, match up signs and symptoms, and then go through a differentiating process, and then arrive at your diagnosis, the best possible guess with the signs and symptoms that are presented. Then that leads us into the treatment planning process. That leads us into treatment planning. We'll break down that a little bit more as we continue to talk. So let's just get a general view of the steps in treatment planning, because the actual treatment plan is going to vary depending on your clinical environment. Each clinical environment has its own requirement for the parameters of treatment planning. However, there are some foundational steps or elements of a treatment plan that you're going to find in every treatment plan. And that is, first of all, you have to behaviorally define what the signs and symptoms are. So I should be able to know what it is that the person is displaying in their behavior, whether it's cognitive behavior, actual, functioning behavior in the doing of, or if it's thinking behavior, whatever it is, I should be able to see that. And so first of all, you provide behavioral definitions. What does it look like when the client is engaged in these behaviors that warrant treatment? And then from behavioral definitions, you will then have a long-term goal, and the thing is that this long-term goal, it must be agreed upon. Well, the best practice is that you develop the whole treatment plan with your client. That's the best practice. And so you got a long-term goal, which is going to then move to your short-term goals and or objectives. And usually the rule of thumb is that you have 2 short-term goals for every long-term goal. That's a rule of thumb. It's not hard and fast. It really depends on your clinical environment. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes within the industry, we use JOGSMA as a treatment planner. Just as an example of it is JOGSMA. It's an older version, but make sure you have the DSM-5 version of JOGSMA if you use that for treatment planning. Yes. And that model is basically there. So behavior definitions, long-term goals, short-term goals, and JOGSMA use two short-term goals and or objectives. And then his process also, which is a typical practice, is 1 intervention per short-term objective. One intervention per short-term objective. And then you must be able to measure. Now, oftentimes this is not listed in JOGSM. I don't think he includes that, right? He does not. Then you must, a common practice is that you've got to be able to measure what it is that you have set as goals. So your next step is measurement. How will you know when your client has arrived at their goal? What's your benchmark, right? What is it that lets you know that a client has met the goals that you guys have agreed upon together? And then, so after you've got your intervention, you've got your goals, and your last step that often is left out is your signature. You have got to have your signature on that treatment plan. And sometimes in best practice is also the client's signature as well. Mm-hmm. But you absolutely must have your signature on there as a best practice.
All right. Well, I think we're going to move right into the treatment plan portion. I think we're going to move right into the treatment plan portion. Okay. I'm going to stop the video here just so that we can upload it quicker.